You know, Sheila, in case anyone's recoiling at the idea of paying $10 for one of these badges, I would buy 2 or 3, and I'll tell you why.
Yep.
Let's fast forward to 2030, 2040, when this pandemic is a forgotten memory by an entire generation. These are going to be collectible. These are the first run I am exempt yellow badges. It's just like every Wednesday when the comic books come out, I always advise Justin on which comic books have potential future collectability, and he's very grateful for that. I'm telling you, folks, buy these to use them in the here and now, and probably as a speculative item in terms of value add in the future. These, I think, are indeed future collector's items. What do you think, Sheila?
I've been going along and collecting everything that I think would be noteworthy, that my grandchildren would think would be interesting when they say to me, Grandma, tell us the time of the Wuhan lung rattles. Tell us all about it. I have been collecting things and putting them in like a Rubbermaid bin. So newspapers of like a noteworthy day or the day that they close things down. I did the same thing when my kids were born. I saved the newspaper from that day and put it in their baby box just so that they have that, so they know the news of the day. And I think that if you're somebody like that who's trying to preserve a little piece of history about what's happening right now, I think these are a great thing, because there's a story to be told about the compliance of people who so quickly did exactly what the government told them. And then there's a story to be told about the people who approached all of this with skepticism, with reason, polite. I mean, you can't talk that button is very polite. That button is a means by which to avoid confrontation, to stand up for your rights, to say, yes, I'm a skeptic if that's the reason why you're wearing it, or yes, I'm medically exempt. There's a lot of those people. But also it's the kinder, gentler way to go through the day while showing your resistance to some of these dumb rules.
And by the way, Sheila, let's talk about the rule makers, because I know there's a contingency out there that are saying, oh, for goodness sakes, we just wear the damn mask already and cooperate.
Yeah.
Yet, why, and we get maintain your bubble, and will you please socially distance, and will you please not gather in groups of more than 10 indoors and more than 25 outdoors? And then I see the Premier of Ontario, who just enacted really draconian harsh penalties as of Friday regarding social gatherings, indoor and outdoor. I look at the wedding he attended just last month for one of his MPPs. No social distancing, way more than 25 people at an outdoor affair, nobody wearing masks. I see John Tory bragging about law enforcement cracking down, but gathering in groups. And this was at the height of the pandemic, Sheila, for photo ops and not wearing his face mask. Lo and behold, how can I ever forget sneaky Patrick Brown putting in all kinds of crazy bylaws for the city of Brampton, hiring a private security company to act as an army of snitches to call bylaw whenever they saw breaking bylaw. And yet this guy sneaks into a hockey rink he had opened up for him and his Barrie buddies. And of course, even the Prime Minister, who, like Doug Ford around Easter, don't get together, don't travel to your cottage on Easter. And guess what? We're traveling to our cottages on Easter. So please, folks, don't give me any sermons when the people who should be leading by example are the very worst violators.
And there seems to be no escape from these totalitarians. They've completely colonized municipal government. Yeah. I know in Alberta, we've taken a much different approach than Ontario, and yet our numbers seem to be similar. I was looking at the numbers yesterday. There's just 3 people in the ICU in Edmonton. That's over 1 million people. Just 3 people in the ICU with the coronavirus. Yet the Edmonton municipal government requires masks inside of all indoor places, like everywhere. But our provincial government didn't mandate these things. I think the opposite is true in Ontario, where if the municipal governments aren't totalitarian enough, then the provincial government steps in. Our provincial government has said look, we're one of the freest jurisdictions right now. We're right up there with South Dakota for our approach in these things. We're letting the municipalities deal with it because these issues are really local, which I guess is fair. However, I mean, municipal governments are really just a breeding ground for control freaks. But in Ontario, the opposite is true. You have a premier who's supposed to be a conservative lecturing you that, like, instead of saying we're leaving this in the hands of the municipalities, that's fine. But your conservative premier is talking down to and scolding citizens because they are resentful of these municipal regulations that none of the people in power seem to follow anyway, as you rightly point out.
And Sheila, let's look at the numbers. I think one of the reasons why politicians of every stripe at every level in Ontario are losing their you-know-what is because the spike in Wuhan virus positive tests. I believe the other day it was 487 positive tests, which was the highest since May. But here's the thing, Sheila. Yes, you're COVID-19 positive. Could you please tell me what the deaths are? And I think the last death in this province, I'm going by memory, it might have been in August at some point. So, in Toronto, rather. Thank you. There we go. These are the Ontario numbers, but the last Toronto death, as Mr. Producer pointed out, was indeed sometime in August. So you could almost make the case, Sheila, that the pandemic is over. Just because there's a positive test, that doesn't mean it's a death sentence. It's like getting the flu. It doesn't mean you're going to die, right? So, that's why I have to raise a Spockian eyebrow when various politicians are, proclaiming this as doomsday because of the spike in numbers. And by the way, I should add, there's been a huge increase in testing. So of course, the numbers are going to be higher than what they once were. In any event. That's my sense.
That's exactly the data I was bringing up on my phone. In Alberta, we have 1,459 active cases. That's active cases. It just means people who have tested positive. That's not people who are sick. That's not people who are exhibiting symptoms. That's not people in the ICU. That's nothing. That's just, okay, well, I have a positive test. That's the number of 4.5 million people. They have completed testing on they've tested over 930,000 people, 933,000 people. That's almost a quarter of our population. They've completed 1.2 million tests in this province. And that's all they could come up with is currently active cases, 1,459. So they've opened up testing to everybody. They're doing these mass testing. So of course the case numbers are skewing upwards, but you do have the most important thing to look at is the hospitalization rates and the ICU rates, which could not be lower.
And we know from doctors and nurses who have spoken to us off the record or in a disguised fashion, they've never been less busy. I always tell that story of that doctor, 30 years of practice. He told me, Dave, for the first time ever the other day at the hospital, I put in a 14-hour shift and I saw 0 patients. That doesn't mean there's no patients to be seen, but elective surgery has been canceled and people are dying on those elective surgery lists, some of them relatively young. That's a scandal. Yep. I'll tell you, Sheila, when all this is over, I hope there's going to be public inquiries, royal commissions to see how we handled this fiasco. And that's what this is, a fiasco, so that we never fall into this trap again. It's been debilitating, and I'm not talking about the death rate from the Wuhan virus. I'm talking about all the complications from shutting down the hospital, people with elective surgery, to shutting down the economy and increasing the rates of depression, suicide, spousal abuse. It is horrible what's happened. But again, this virus is from China, much like the other few pandemics that's gone around the world. And Justin Trudeau basically admires the basic kind of dictatorship that China is in terms of getting things done. Unbelievable. Do we have super chats, my friend?
We do. There's one thing, though, that you left off the list of social catastrophes because of the pandemic lockdown, and that is the increase in the number of stillbirths across the world, but particularly in the Western world, because the Western world so quickly moved to lockdown. And so there was a stigma around going to the hospital. So pregnant women who are experiencing complications or noticing changes in their pregnancy, you're already a little bit anxious during pregnancy anyways, because you think everything's going wrong and everything's weird. But they weren't going to the hospital because we were told to stay away from the hospital. Everybody was. So pregnant women didn't go to the hospital when they noticed, okay, well, I feel like I'm swelling, my blood pressure's up, whatever. And they were also, a lot of obstetricians moved to online, like Zoom obstetrician appointments. Well, how does your obstetrician check your blood pressure, your blood sugars, look at you for swelling or changes in that way? And so they saw a dramatic increase in stillbirths during the pandemic. That's just they will never be counted as victims of the pandemic, but those babies and those women who have to deliver fully formed dead babies because they were unable to see their obstetrician, they should be definitely in the death counts for the pandemic.
But not to worry, Sheila, if anyone's stressed out by these kind of tales, well, we always kept the liquor stores open, right? So you could buy a bottle of scotch.
The liquor store, the Reid man.
It helps, of course, in Ontario. It's a government monopoly liquor store. But anyways, I digress.
That's an excerpt from my daily TV show that I do live at 12 noon Eastern time. We talk about the news of the day, we play interesting viral videos, and most importantly, I take your questions that you chat to me through YouTube Super Chat. I think that's the funnest part of it. So tune in every weekday at 12 noon Eastern time, only here at rebelnews.com.